Hello and welcome to another edition of the Campaign Catch-Up, joined this week by CBN Chief Political Analyst David Brody and by CBN DC Bureau Chief Dana Ritter. Well, hello all and welcome to the show today.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Well, thanks for having us, Dan. We appreciate it.
Well, I mean, this is, again, nothing has slowed down as it comes to the calls for Biden to step out. I think he tried to tamp it down. So, David, why don't you give us the latest here on kind of where things stand?
Well, it's Defiant Joe. I mean, that's what we're seeing. You wonder if this is kind of the last gasp, or is he in it for the long haul? I get a sense that it's the last gasp. I think, look, I don't want to play psychiatrist or anything, but it feels like we're a bit in the 5 stages of grief here. You know, the denial, anger, the bargaining, depression, and eventually acceptance. I think we're in the denial anger stage. And I think we saw some of that today on Morning Joe, where he calls in and says, you know, basically, I'm not going anywhere. You're going to have to basically kick me dragging and screaming from the Resolute desk with Jill at the drapes. I mean, that's kind of what this has turned into at this point. And so, you know, how does this end? Look, here's the problem for Biden. It's not a normal crisis. This is not something that goes away in 24 hours, 72 hours, or even a week or two. This is just going to get worse. No one can expect him to play error-free baseball, so to speak, the rest of the campaign. So the drumbeat's just going to get louder, and I think ultimately he'll probably succumb to it. But right now, he's fighting like you know what.
Yeah, well, and Dana, this is interesting because really this is the first time I think the Biden administration has had sort of a hostile press to deal with. They're really digging in on this, and they're not letting up on this. And I don't know that the Biden administration has had that, at least not to this level before. So, I mean, this is going to be uncharted waters for them to handle on that front. They're fielding really kind of a lot of inquisitive questions on a topic they don't want to talk about.
So true, Dan. And I think that what you're seeing now is the White House is taking this very personally. It's about the president himself. But then I think you also have some members of the press who are also being held to the fire, so to speak, here, because we know that there's been reporting about problems with the president's mental acuity. And, you know, we've all seen videos for a couple of years, and there have been questions that are floating around. And it seemed for a while that the big press or the mainstream press was just kind of like thinking, you know, this is maybe not kosher to talk about, or we don't have, you know, some kind of confirmation of something really being wrong, so we're not going with these stories. But if you think back even just to, I think it was in the fall, you started to see stories from the Wall Street Journal and from the New York Times that were looking at the patterns that we were seeing with the president. And it was dripping then. I think what's been interesting from my perspective, since we're going to be at 2 weeks on Thursday since this debate, and you're just seeing more and more and more and more. There was that Axios report out over the weekend, a leak of what the prep book looks like for the president when he's going to have a speech somewhere. Stuff like that doesn't leak. And the only people that have access to stuff like that are people who are on advance teams that are working for the president. And so I think that the fact that you're seeing these leaks from this level and from this White House, which has thus far not been a very leaky White House, you know, if you were to compare it to other administrations, they're pretty tight-lipped. And I think this shows that there is some concern among his staff and among members of the advance team even, or, you know, at the White House, that why else would they start leaking this stuff and why now? And as far as taking it personally, I was just watching a press briefing with the press secretary, and she is being questioned about her own credibility, because we saw her after the debate say that the president wasn't seen by a doctor, and then the president goes on ABC News with George Stephanopoulos and says, the doctor took one look at me and said, you're exhausted. Then she's up there at the press briefing today saying, oh, he just talked to the president. Well, which one was it? You know, was it a Skype call? Did he look at him on a Skype call? I mean, what is the truth here? I think the American people deserve to know that. And the press is hearing from the American people, and members of Congress are hearing from people, and there's just no escaping it at this point.
Yeah, and David, I mean, it seems like you said, he's at least trying to give it the old college try here. What does happen if he actually doesn't want to give this up? I mean, I don't know. I mean, how do you see it all shaking out? I mean, you kind of said you think he'll succumb to this. So how does that play out? How does that look? What do you see happening here?
Well, he even hinted at it today, Dan, in that Morning Joe interview, in essence saying, bring it on. Go ahead and run someone against me at the convention. And that's the answer. I mean, if Joe Biden holds on and says, I'm not going anywhere, then it's really going to be up to the party brass to decide, are we going to make this a spectacle? Are we going to go ahead and try and run another candidate? And that's the other problem. It wouldn't be Kamala, obviously, if Joe's still in the race. So who would it be? Gretchen Whitmer took her name out of contention today. So that leaves what? Gavin Newsom, maybe J.B. Pritzker. I mean, there's a few, but is anybody going to really want to be that person to try and challenge Biden? And so how would the challenge look? Because a lot of people are saying, well, look, he's got the delegates. Well, yes, but with an asterisk. And the asterisk is that the DNC rules say the delegates are pledged to the candidate, quote, in good conscience. What they could do is say, look, in good conscience, I can't pledge my support to Joe Biden. And then we have a different situation. So I think it really depends on what the party brass decides they want to do. Do they want to make this into a must-see TV spectacle? Because they would argue that this is all about defeating Trump and saving democracy, which, by the way, this just in, as Joe Biden has been saying for years and years. Or are they going to just say, you know what, let's take our chances with Biden and hope for the best? So I think ultimately, if Biden stays in, I think it's just a decision for the party brass to say, how ugly do we want this to become? But here's the thing. There are a lot of Democrats that are already out saying Biden needs to go. So they're on the record. This is already a fiasco. I mean, this is making the Kevin McCarthy GOP speaker fight look like child's play at this point. I mean, this is really bad stuff. I think the next level of this is, what does Hakeem Jeffries say in public? What does Nancy Pelosi say? What does Chuck Schumer say? I think those are the three people that we wait and hear, because that takes it to a whole other level.
Yeah, and Dana, obviously we know money makes politics really move, and it's an unfortunate kind of aspect of the way this system works. A lot of times, obviously influenced by just watch the money, where is it going? So all of these tens and tens of millions of dollars that the Biden-Harris campaign's raising right now, at some point, do you see the powers that be that control the purse strings of this campaign sort of really pushing this thing, or what do you see happening there?
Well, we know that they're concerned about it. I mean, we've heard from some donors who are already saying that there should be a change made. We also know that the president called into a Democratic Finance Committee call, and he was just talking about the future. In fact, he said on that call, which I believe was this morning, that he was trying to pivot from this crisis. I mean, good luck with that, right? But he was trying to pivot, and that he wants it to just be attack, attack, attack. Meanwhile, has anybody seen Donald Trump since the debate, except for that one event in Chesapeake? Right. No, he's chilling because he's
purpose.
Right? He's letting this ride out. And so I don't know how or when the president plans this attack, attack, attack strategy, And then just one quick point about timing. I was watching a lot of the Sunday shows yesterday, and I heard Donna Brazile, which, David, I know you included her in your piece that was on the 700 Club, and she was talking about the delegates and talking about a conference call that they were going to be having this week. So I'm interested to see what comes out of that. But then, some people were saying this is going to be this make or break week. I actually disagree with that. I don't think this is the make or break week. I think the president, if he's going to hang on, this is the week that you see him hang on. He's got 38 international leaders coming in town for this NATO summit. He's not going to bow out or change his mind with that going on his turf. So that happens in Washington this week, and he's got a press conference planned for Thursday night. He'll do that. I don't think this week is going to be the make or break week.
No, but I think early next week could be, because if that solo press conference is on Thursday, and if it goes horribly south, which, by the way, not going to Vegas on this, but the Vegas odds probably pretty good that it's not going to go well. Okay, that's Thursday. give it some time to simmer Friday, the Sunday shows, here they come. And then all of a sudden, Monday morning, Tuesday, I wouldn't be surprised if the complexion changes by then, especially if it's a disastrous press conference.
And remember, it's RNC convention week at that point.
Oh, and there's that.
Right. You're in there and you've got, an anticipated VP announcement from Trump, which at that point will get a lot of airtime. Once he makes that pick, that's going to change, the media focus, at least temporarily.
Well, and it makes you think that certainly the impression is that the Biden campaign, at least for Biden, is on life support when he's saying things like, can I still do the job? Yeah, I'm not as good of a debater as I used to be, but I can still do this job effectively. But at the same time, you're hearing things like, well, as long as I do things in between 10 and 4 and I get some naps and I don't do anything after 8 o'clock, or maybe I don't travel so much. I mean, this is kind of the gig of the president of the United States, is you have to be running nonstop, essentially. Like, this is not a cushy gig. Like, most Americans that work average jobs are working more than what he's describing. He's saying that he's able to do. And so it's this contradictory message. Can he do the job? But then here's all the restrictions I have. So it's just the messaging is just all out of whack at this point.
Well, I think you're right, Dan. And part of the problem here for Biden is that he's got a situation here where there's nowhere really to go at this point. I mean, it's just going to get worse from here. And I think the conversation right now is about him resigning as a candidate for president. There's a separate conversation starting to happen, which is, wait a minute, if he's not able to serve another 4 years, why in the world is he serving as president right now? I mean, if he only operates between 10 and 4 and needs naps and X, Y, and Z, everything you laid out, wouldn't there be a more robust discussion about his job, even though it's only for a few more months? Well, actually, not really. It'd be 6 more months at least. So I think this is a national security issue at this point. And getting back real quick, I want to make a point about what Dana said earlier about the media. Look, and I don't say this lightly, but this is a cover-up by the media. I mean, Dana's right that there was a Wall Street Journal and New York Times reporting, but let's think that through. The timeline on that was within the last 3 months, 6 months, roughly, if that. So the point is that, as Dana said, we've seen the clips for a while. And by the way, the clips were not cheap fakes. They were not deep fakes. If anything, it gave the conservative media out there more oxygen to say, hey, you know what? We're not a bunch of kooks that are trying to make things up. We see what we see. And this has really been a gaslighting situation at this point. The Biden administration has been saying everything's fine when everything's not fine. And that's a problem, because when you lose trust, you lose the vote, you lose the people. And so I think that's where we're at. And also, the Biden administration, or the Biden campaign, I should say, wanted to make this an election about Trump, but instead it's now a referendum on Biden. And that's the worst possible scenario for the Biden campaign. It's no longer about Trump. They wanted it to be about Trump, but it's not. And once again, I'm trying to think of the high road here. When I say the high road, how does Biden get out of this? Look, this just in. I'm not a Biden, advisor, in case you didn't know. But look, the way I see it, the way I think it probably would best go down is to say, for Biden to get out and take the high road by saying, look, I defeated Trump. I got us out of COVID. Age doesn't discriminate. It's been a pleasure, but democracy is too important to leave it basically in my hands. He wouldn't say it that way, but democracy, and I want to hand it over to the next generation. Kamala Harris, here you go. And look, I think that's the best you get. I think you preserve your legacy at that point. You have Democrats going, thank you, thank you, thank you. Otherwise, right now, this is turning into, Biden is totally tarnishing any sort of legacy that he wanted to have in Washington. And that's kind of where I see the trajectory right now.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because he does have an off ramp to do that, and the consequences could be disastrous the other way for him if he were to lose this election. And I was going to call it up here while we were talking, but you guys know that I often cite the RCP average. It's my favorite one to look at, because it tends to be pretty accurate when you couple all these things together and you look at them. I haven't looked at it lately, but I mean, as of last week, I mean, Trump was surging in that thing. And so at some point, Dana, does Biden's team, maybe like you said, that you have these leaks coming out. You've got people inside that are maybe being urged by other influencers within the Democratic Party saying, hey, you got to tell him, you got to urge him, you got to try to get him on board with this. At some point, do the numbers become just too much to ignore?
Well,
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
ahead,
what I was going to say is that, yes, and even if you think back to that interview that George Stephanopoulos did with him when he phrased the question a certain way, if Nancy and Chuck, or, I can't remember how he put it, but if they come to you and say that you can't beat Donald Trump, and you notice he dodged that question, he just seemed to not be in reality, like, well, that's just not even possible. And George is like, Mr. President, we've never seen anybody come back from a 36% approval rating. And he's just like not in reality. Maybe it's a stage of grief, like David said. I think there's also an element of irony here. We have a president who's listening to a small set of advisors who are telling him what he wants to hear, and who is, in that interview with George, I keep going back to that because I just think it gives us so many clues into where his mind is right now. George asked him another question, if your worst fears are realized and Trump is reelected and, NATO falls apart and all of these things that you talk about, are you going to look back on that and regret it? And his answer was about himself. He said, well, I would just want to know that I did the best I could. Well, that's interesting coming from a president who seems like part of their campaign message that is against Trump is saying that Trump is in this for himself and is thinking of himself. And then here we have Biden, listening to a small group of people who tell him what they want to hear and not in reality and thinking of himself. It's like, wow, this is the irony,
Well, and speaking of that interview real quick, there was one thing that stood out to me. There were a lot of things that stood out to me. One thing just seems so obvious. I mean, George Stephanopoulos asked him, said, so did you watch back the debate performance? And he said, I don't know. I don't think I did. How do you not know?
To me, that was the moment that the interview was like,
exactly.
Right there. Yeah.
How do you not know that? I mean, and I think it's a bit rhetorical in terms of I think we now know how he doesn't know that. But one last thing, in terms of the poll numbers, he got some good news. Biden did. There was a Bloomberg poll that came out that shows he's winning in Michigan barely. And in Wisconsin. The problem is he's down 7 points in Pennsylvania, and he has to win all three. So that's a problem. And Trump is winning in all the other states, even though he's in the margin of error. But to the real clear politics average, you're right, Dan. He's in a world of hurt. One last thing I'd say is we may see history repeating itself in a strange sort of way, to a degree at least. It was 50 years ago. This August, 1974, where it was the House and Senate minority leaders at the time who walked into Richard Nixon's office and said, Mr. President, it's over. You don't have the support of Congress. So you're either going to be impeached and probably convicted, or you'll need to resign. And they gave the, the come to Jesus meeting talk with Biden. And the rest, of course, is presidential history.
Yeah.
The sense that something, maybe even in August, probably in July, is coming too, where in the role of the congressional folks from that day will now be Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi going into his office and saying, Mr. President, it's time. So I think that's where we're at.
And just from a logistics standpoint, I mean, let's say that does happen. I did look up the RCP average right now, and look, a month ago, it was basically a dead heat, and right now Trump's got a 3.5 point lead on the RCP average. So that's a massive jump in 1 month. The lines are going in the opposite direction, and so that's obviously not good for Biden here. But let's say this does play out, and he does have to drop out. And make your point, David, and then my question was
no, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, my question.
I'll probably just repeat myself.
Okay, my question was basically, is there any other person that it could be besides Kamala at this point, just because of the logistics of it all, with only a couple months here to go?
Dana, I'm curious to get your take on this, but I'd be more than happy to answer. But Dana, what do you think?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think Biden definitely only goes literally kicking and screaming. Like, I don't.
Yes.
I really think he will hang on as absolutely long as he can, and maybe forever, if it's possible. But no, I don't think that there's any way that they can go in any other direction than Kamala Harris. And I think you've even seen some Democrats starting to lay the groundwork for that over the last few days. You've seen the compliments about her kind of start up. We also know that, a big part of the messaging and the platform for the DNC this time around is going to have to do with abortion. And I read a story today that they purchased a lot of those advertising wraps for buses in Milwaukee during the RNC. They were going to say, if you want Roe, vote for Joe. And I think that, if Kamala is at the top of the ticket, they will go really heavy and hard on that message and take it from there. But I don't see them going in any other direction for the top of the ticket. Now, for what they do for the VP, I think that could get super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're Gavin Newsom, why in the world are you going to come in July or August and try and do this and possibly tarnish or ruin any chance you have in the future? I don't see that. Plus, I don't think his loafers play well in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But that's
right?
Yeah, that and the hairspray and all of that. So that's one thing. No, it's for sure. It's well, I think what we watch now is if Biden does resign the candidacy for president, does he endorse her? And I'm assuming he would. And at that point, she gets the war chest money. I mean, she gets the money, the campaign money. So that's a big deal. And look, I think the Democrats, I mean, if you're the Trump campaign, you want Biden to run. I mean, that's obvious.
Yeah, I agree.
If you get Kamala, everybody's making fun of Kamala and Democrats don't like her. Okay, that might all be true, and Trump may win. I'm not saying he won't. But here's the thing. You get a boost. You're going to get a boost with Kamala, at least in the temporary. You're going to have, first of all, it's like going from cardboard Biden to, I don't know, Brussels sprouts with Kamala. It's kind of like a leg, an increase there. The energy level will be through the roof.
We all know the media will do the whole. Again, you'd have potential history with a first woman president. They would absolutely make that the lead.
A first woman president, first black, obviously. So you got the daily double, if you like to say in politics. And then, you have all of that, plus the fact that they've got the abortion issue, as Dana too, and the energy level. The energy level is going to be through the roof, and then they're going to be able to say, this is where we're going with Democrats, the new generation, blah, yada, yada, yada. The problem is then Kamala has to speak. And then
and you know what? She better get ready for all the questions. What did you know? When did you cover? What was the deal?
Yes.
Yeah.
All of that. I mean, I think it would be a complete credibility attack. The Biden's mental acuity trail will continue even if he isn't on the ticket.
Yeah,
that's a great point.
Super interesting. Well, Dana Ritter, David Brody, thank you so much for this edition of Campaign Catch Up. I mean, this obviously isn't going away, as you guys said, and so who knows where we'll be by next week, but we'll be here to wrap it all up and to cover it all. Appreciate you guys being here.
Right.
I appreciate it, Dan. I go around with my live shot gear anywhere I go. I'm ready. I'm ready at a moment's notice.
Perfect.
It's actually true.
That is not fake news.